Okay? And I'm going to throw up several statutes up here. They're not going to be up here long enough for you to take down all the detail that's on the screen, so please don't get frustrated with me. What I would recommend that you do is maybe just jot down the title of the legislation. Very easy then to go out and Google any of those if you want some more detail. Okay? I'm going to run through these as quickly as possible. Okay? So between 1866 and 1875, large Republican majorities in Congress passed several civil rights acts to enforce the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendments, particularly the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. These civil rights statutes authorized the federal government to impose heavy penalties for violations. And just very quickly here, we'll get back on track with that, but let me just show you what I'm talking about when I say large Republican majorities. Notice in the Congress, the 36th Congress before the Civil War broke out, you had what we today would call divided government. Right? The Democrats had a majority in one chamber, and the Republicans had a majority in the other chamber. Not actually a majority, it's a plurality, but there was several other political parties that had seats in Congress. It was the party that had the most seats in the House of Representatives. Okay? Notice what happens after the Civil War. You get in the 39th, 40th, 41st, 42nd, and 43rd Congresses these huge Republican majorities. Okay? As much as 80%, 82% of these chambers have Republicans. So it becomes, frankly, a political environment where Republicans are able to pass some very ambitious legislation. Okay? So let me just tick these off for you here real quick. 1866 Civil Rights Act. This legislation granted black citizens equal rights to contract, to sue and to be sued, to marry, to travel, and to own property. It may be hard for you to imagine in 2019 that there was a time in our history, at least in some places in this country, where African Americans could not even get married, or they couldn't enter into contracts, or they couldn't sue someone, or even be sued by someone else. So this legislation made it so that all citizens are subject to like punishment, pains, and penalties. Any person guilty of depriving citizens of their stated rights because of race, color, or previous condition of servitude could be fined, imprisoned, or both. 1867, the Reconstruction Act. This legislation allowed former slaves to participate fully in the political arena. As a result of the legislation, African Americans were able in many places in the country to hold office for the first time. And that actually did happen. In many states, for example, where they were drafting new constitutions, for example, in the South, places like Texas, which had been defeated in the Civil War, were forced back into the United States. And one of the things that they had to do was write new constitutions. In Texas, that happened in 1869. And for the first time in Texas and in other places in the South, former slaves sat on those constitutional conventions, sat as delegates to those constitutional conventions, and had a hand in writing those very important state constitutions. There was at least one state, South Carolina, where for a number of years, African Americans actually held a majority of the seats in the state legislature. There's a couple of reasons for that. Not only were African Americans enfranchised, what does that word mean? What's the word enfranchised mean? Anybody know? If you read the chapter 5 in the textbook, you should. Anybody's ever heard that word before? Enfranchised?
Does it have to do with represented?
Well, something, but we have to be more precise. It just means the right to vote, given the right to vote. And that's what enfranchise means. The franchise is the right to vote. So to enfranchise means to give the right to vote. What would the word disenfranchise mean? Take away the right to vote. So not only were African Americans enfranchised during this period, but white Confederates who had participated in the treason against the United States, as it was perceived, were disenfranchised. The combination of those two things African Americans being enfranchised, whites being disenfranchised, meant that African Americans were able to serve in positions of authority, get elected to positions of authority like constitutional conventions and state legislatures. Participated in the development of new comprehensive programs for state education in the South. Okay, so that's a big one. The Reenforcement Act of 1870. This legislation stated that all citizens otherwise qualified to vote in any election could not be denied the right to vote because of race. Under the Constitution in the United States, states run the elections. That's still true down to today. We don't really truly have something called a national election in the United States. Even the presidential election is not really a national election. It's an election that's held in 50 different states in the District of Columbia. In the state of Texas, the election laws in the state of Texas are not the same as the election laws in the state of Florida or in the state of California. Okay? But Congress has undertaken from time to time to pass legislation that prevents the states from administering election laws that are discriminatory. And this is the first effort on the part of Congress to do that. Congress is not going to allow the states to have election laws that discriminate on the basis of race when it comes to voting.